It is a new year, 2024, a time for quiet reflection and resolution. Now, how have we been doing as a country and how will we progress? This and more we'll be looking at on the conversation. And for that discussion, I'll be joined by Professor Rosalea Hamilton, co-chair of Advocates Network Jamaica. Welcome to the conversation. I am Kwame Thomas. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am fine so far, and I trust that the holiday season was excellent for you.
Absolutely, it was.
Good. So each year we start with moments of quiet reflection, individually and collectively, and then we think about what resolution should we pull from that. So I think that's one of the best ways for us to start. I won't ask you to grade the country in terms of its performance, but I'll ask, how do you think we did collectively as a country? What were some of the things that we should have paid more attention to, and what were some of the things that we could have avoided?
Yes. You know, that's such a tough question because there are some areas in which we did fairly well, but there's so many other areas that we could have done much better. And we can think about the crime problem, that is just so huge. Our concern about governance, however, is troubling because we're seeing developments that is giving us reason to pause and to reflect on things we've never quite seen before. We can talk about what we're seeing with respect to the Prime Minister's declaration. You know, for 2 years, we're not seeing that matter settled. That's concerning because, you know, if there's information that's required, that should be provided as quickly as possible. Very importantly, we're talking about laws that need to be upheld. And so it begs the question, what is the difficulty why this matter is not settled?
Could it not be an issue of either misuse, one, or misunderstanding of the bureaucratic process? Because it might be a case, for example, let's say that I'm building a house and you have decided, because we're friends, you have decided to donate some blocks or some building material to me, but you never saw it fit to get those receipts and all of that because it's a gift.
Yes.
Now, how do I declare that? You know, would it be that, or shouldn't it be that the IC in this case would be the ones to make an assessment and say, all right, then these things should be valued X, Y, Z once I have declared that these things were gifts and...
You know, whatever the details are, I think the concern for most Jamaicans is, why is it taking so long? Why is it taking so long to settle the matters? If it's the details that need to be provided, there's need to be some agreement about whether what is on the table is adequate or it's not.
Yeah, that's why I asked about the bureaucratic
Right,
process.
and so if it is a bureaucratic, let's resolve that. Whatever the details are, I think it's really unsettling for many people. I've heard people in the diaspora talk about it. I've heard people in Jamaica, supporters of the JLP who are concerned. So this is an issue that I think we all should be very, very concerned about. There are issues that come to mind, for example, the development in Haiti. Many of us are very, very troubled about that we have our neighbors. We understand the history of what our brothers and sisters in Haiti have gone through. We understand the particular difficulty they have now. And to not give them a fair shot at asylum is unacceptable. And I think that this is not only a fundamental human rights, but we argue that it's even inconsistent with our own refugee policy. So those kinds of developments are troubling. We can certainly talk about what has happened on the constitutional reform front, where, you know, many of us were very excited and very supportive of the government's effort to undertake comprehensive constitutional reform. In fact, the terms of reference of the Constitutional Reform Committee makes it very clear that they wanted to see that they're engaged in a process of profound, comprehensive constitutional reform, the most comprehensive reform that we've seen since our independence. That's the language of the CRC. And therefore, if we're going to embark on this process, many of us are very disappointed that there's not extensive public education to deepen our understanding of what this means after nearly 2 years of the establishment. Or is it a year? I think it's 1 year, after nearly 1 year of the establishment of this committee.
So what should they be doing differently, though, in terms of, because you spoke about the idea of extensive public education campaigns. Is it that they're not doing enough? Is it that they're not doing anything at all?
It's not enough. It's clearly not enough. The issues concerning our constitution are complex. So first of all, let's put this whole process in historical context. Why is it that after 61 years, we're now talking about comprehensive constitutional reform? Why is it taking so long? So the part of that public education is understanding this historical process, understanding this document and its significance for the rule of law, and the role of every citizen in shaping a document that defines the relationship between those who govern us and those of us who are being governed. And importantly, defines our rights and our freedoms in our society. So these are deep, deep, profound issues that get to the core of what we call a Jamaica, right? And so I think much more public education is needed. There has been efforts on the part of the committee. I think even the committee members have been talking about this extensive education program that is to be rolled out. We've yet to see it.
So in your mind, though, what would that look like in terms of an extensive education or public education campaign? How would that look?
Programs like yours will be engaged on a regular basis, having these kinds of discussions. There'd be ads on the television, wherever. There will be social media engagement. There will be face-to-face engagement in the schools, across communities, in churches and so on, in a very organized way. There would be a national conversation taking place in different groups and across the nation. That's how it ought to look like. We ought to feel it because it's all around us. And it's opportunities to learn bits and pieces of this thing. We're going to a referendum, the first time in the history of Jamaica since our independence that the Jamaican people are asked to participate in a referendum. What exactly will that mean? What does that look like? Why is that important? Right? So how will we ensure that, A, we don't get the voter turnout that we get in national elections, which is heading in the wrong direction, right? And B, how do we avoid the kind of partisan approach to the referendum, which is fundamentally about an issue and a choice that we all make about the future of the country that we want.
So, okay, all right. So I see where you're going with that. But sometimes one gets the impression that the average man might not be so interested, whether it's by choice or by not having enough information to know whether or not you're interested. So because of that, the average man might just be concerned with the results. Let me know what happens and what are the implications. So results and implications. So, and do it in a timely manner. So I don't want to hear every week you're telling me about constitutional reform and whatnot. I just want to know that at the end of the day, it's done and this is the result and these are the implications.
That's one perspective, and I'm sure there's some people who would feel that way. But my own experience in engaging Jamaican people is that they want to know more. There is a hunger for deepening our understanding of the crisis that the country faces today. Most of us, many of us are very unhappy. This is not about what the government is doing. This is about the state of our nation, our safety. Recent polls just said most of us, nearly 80% of us, feel unsafe. This is not simply what the government does. It's about how we see each other, how we treat each other, how we respect each other as human beings. So I think that part of this sharing of information goes beyond simply the Constitution, but our role in our society, our role as citizens, the responsibilities we have, not only to engage a conversation about the Constitution, but really how our society runs. Very importantly, I don't want to forget this point. A big part of the public education is the use of the arts, music, our culture, pictures, paintings, all of that signals this change that we're about to make and conveys information in ways that captures all our sensibilities and our understanding. There are Jamaican people who would have no problem listening to a tune that talks about the Republic and the whole issue of the Constitution. They have no problem.
But one of the things that I've wondered, though, as far as the constitutional reform is concerned, all right, so we're going to a republic. How will that republic look? Who will our head of state be? What kind of power will we seek to invest in this head of state? Will it be a figurehead? Or will it be something else? Because I can look at a number of republics. You have Barbados recently, but you have Trinidad, you have the United States of America, you have Germany, and these are different kinds of republics. Now, how do we know which one do we want, and what are the implications for any one that we get?
Exact reason why we need the conversation, and it's an ongoing thing, because just that point you've just raised about what this should look like. Let me start here. What the republic should look like is exactly what we, the people of Jamaica, want it to look like. I want you to pause and think about that answer, because there's a view, and it would capture the kind of person you just want results, right? You were just saying somebody just want results. Yeah, some Jamaicans just want, just give us the republic. Now, if that's what you want, then you may get a republic that you don't like, right? So it's another view to say, I own Jamaica. This Jamaica belongs to me. The future of Jamaica is in my hands. I must be responsible to shaping what it looks like.
All right, so with that, I'll go to our first break. When we continue, we look further on issues of constitutional reform. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the conversation. So, Professor Hamilton, so just before the break, we started looking at constitutional reform, and an analogy came to mind. So, I'm courting a young lady. I have interest in becoming her partner, but I don't know anything about her. That's the closest thing I could look at this constitutional reform as being. The difference with that, however, is that if I don't like what she stands for or how she is now, I can change. But we can't change the country, can we?
Well, we can't change the country and get a new country. I mean, it wouldn't be quite like that. But we can change the terms of engagement. Mm-hmm. In fact, a lot of couples break up before fully exploring what could the possible outcomes if we changed our behavior. So you recognize that, I don't like when you do certain things. Well, don't do it if you want this relationship to work. I think similarly for our country, we will put rules in place. That's what the constitutional change is about. And let's go back to where we started in 1962, when we've put the constitutional arrangement. 61 years later, we're now talking about changing the rules. Why? Because they're not working for us. They're not working for us. Fundamentally, the constitutional framework was set up prior to our independence. Those are the rules that framed the old colonial arrangement. It was a highly centralized approach to governance, where the power resided at the top of the society and very little trickled down to the people. Mm-hmm. So you had in 62 the shifting of the power from the governor to the hands of the executive, the cabinet, and the prime minister in particular. A lot of power is centralized in the hands of our prime minister. Now, we've grown up 60 years later, and we recognize that we want to have a say. These decisions are profound decisions that are affecting our lives on a regular basis. Whether it is an investment that's taking place that is going to affect our environment, we want to say, right? And so these kinds of issues are now confronting us. We've all grown up in terms of our level of education and understanding about the world. So we now need to change the terms of engagement. Now, you talked about the Republic. Yeah, well, we have some ideas where we want to go. But in the process of going there, we will find out, it's not quite what we think it would be. We have the opportunity to change. Importantly, we have this conversation going in the country about, moving the king as head of state and creating a president and putting powers in the hands of the presidency. There are countries in the world in which they have set up a presidency and decide to change, to go back to a parliamentary arrangement because the presidency thing didn't work. Mm-hmm. Okay? So countries have the option to change the rules that we set. They're not fixed in law. And importantly, like any set of rules, you update them on an ongoing basis.
So it's about how well these rules serve us.
Absolutely. And we should learn from experiences. And to use your analogy of courting, and we've all gone through the phases where you meet someone, you like someone, you don't quite know that person, but you go through a process of getting to know. That's information sharing. That is about education. Educating yourself about who this person is and what they're like. That's why this discussion about the educational agenda around constitutional reform is so important.
Yes, so of course, there's a whole lot more I could ask on constitutional reform, but earlier when we started crime, we looked at crime. Crime has been an issue for us for far too long. And we know that there are no quick fixes at all. We have tried a number of things. How do you think that we dealt with that? Because right now, based on the statistics, all major crimes are trending down. But you stated earlier, the polls have said it, that 85% of Jamaicans are still at the edge of their seats. How can we fix that? And it's not about the government, it's how can we as a people, as a country, fix that, considering that major crimes are trending down, but still.
Yes. There's several layers. I want to say that fundamentally, I see the crime problem as a development issue.
How so?
Because if we think about who are committing the crimes and where, what we find is that we're seeing pockets of a society where there absence of critical assets we need to progress in the world. Low quality skills and education is at the core, right? Doesn't mean that people with tertiary education are not committing crime, that's so. Yeah. But when we look at some of the violent crimes, when we look across the spectrum, you see that we're talking about people with very little educational skills. You look in the environment in which they're growing up, cramped environment, overcrowded environments, these garrison communities and so on. These are not, some of these communities and living conditions, I would say, is inhumane, right? We look at the access to public resources, health resources, etc. These are absent. Now, in the context of all of that, where we have a highly unequal society, where the very people we're talking about living in sometimes subhuman conditions. They are interfacing with those of us who are living a life of luxury. And the gap is staring us in our face. Jamaica is today one of the most unequal societies in the world. We rival Haiti in terms of inequality. Mm. So we see the aspirations of Jamaicans today is, boy, I'm just going get what I can get right now, take what I can take and live a good life because me don't expect to live beyond 25 or 30 years old.
So couldn't that be one of the issues though that cause us to be that way? Because here I am thinking that, listen, it don't make sense I try to do anything else. I just need to come, get what I need to get so that I can exit peacefully.
So what is framing that mindset? This is what I'm saying. It's a complex issue because I start with the conditions. None of us are born criminals. Yeah? We can agree on that.
Yes.
So we have a social environment in which we're growing up in that shapes our views and our attitudes and so on. So many of these kids are growing up with no parents, or the parents are themselves criminals. And so to that extent, the mindset is being shaped in a way that perpetuates criminality. And so what we've seen is intergenerational cycles of poverty, criminality that work together. And what we have is a mindset now that is frightening, because we're looking at each other not as human beings, but as entities that we need to confront in a very vicious way to get our way. That's what it seems like. That's what it feels like when we're going to kill each other over a pair of shoes. You know, and these kinds of experiences we're hearing about, it is very strange to many of us, but it comes out of an environment in which that is the norm. So we do have an individual responsibility, but there's also a social responsibility to fix the system that we are perpetuating, that perpetuates these cycles of poverty and inequality.
But where would that change start, or where would it start, or where could it start?
It starts with us as individuals, because we have to demand more. We have to demand more of ourselves in terms of our responsibility to, you know, play an active role in shaping our society as owners of this country, and not leaving it to somebody else to make decisions for us. And we also have to actively hold those we put in charge to make these important decisions accountable. We have to ensure that they make better decisions, that they use our tax dollars in a much more efficient and effective way.
But right here, I'm seeing there are some, I wouldn't say there are inherent inconsistencies, but there are some weaknesses in the statement, because let's be honest, I don't know what I don't know, and that in and of itself presents an issue. So because I don't know what I don't know, how do I then come to that place where I can begin to, one, hold me responsible, and then after holding myself responsible, I can now hold those whom I have put in power accountable for the decisions.
Yeah, and it's a process, because, you know, we're not talking about, you know, 100% of anything. We all won't get to that level. But for those who don't know, they don't know, there are those who know. And for those of us who know, we have a responsibility to ensure that we don't recreate and perpetuate in the society a set of people who don't know that them don't know. In other words, the quality of the education that our people get matters. We are perpetuating an apartheid system of education. That's what we have.
Also,
there is one set of schools that we go to. We call them traditional schools. They have no problem. But these non-traditional schools do not produce the same quality of education. They lack the resources. They lack the kinds of infrastructure and what is required to produce educated citizens.
Well, that seems to be a function of support, whether it's from the past students of said traditional high school, or so you find that, and leadership of the institution, because you find that the
a whole
principals,
range of issues, absolutely. But nonetheless, whatever the specific details are, what are the facts? Look at your educational report that was just produced, the Orlando Patterson report. It talks about this, that we have this inequity in our education system. Only a few of us get the best education in this country. Now, you know, let's look at the data. Let's look at the data on the labor force. What we're seeing right now is that about over 60% of the labor force has no training, right? And when we look at those who are actually in jobs, 77% are at the lowest skill jobs. Skill level 1 and skill level 2 according to the ILO classification of skills, right? Elementary occupations. Those are the skills. Now, how do we grow our economy in such a way that it benefits our people, because they get higher wages, they are more creative and innovative and so on, and we can produce globally competitive goods and services. How do we get there with a labor force that is at the lowest, has the lowest levels of skills? So we have to interrogate our education system better. I know that there have been changes taking place. They're not enough to meet the challenges that we have. We have to do much more, much faster.
Much more, much faster. So I'm hearing a number of issues, and funny enough though, what you're saying is not all that dissimilar from what other guests have said in terms of crime being a social issue among others, and it being very complex for us to solve. But we'll continue with that right after the break.
We haven't touched things like parenting and all these kinds of issues. Big problem.
Exactly.
Yes.
So stay with us. We go to our next break. You're watching The Conversation. I'm Kwame, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to The Conversation, where we're having a discussion with Professor of Economics, Rosalea Hamilton, who is also the co-chair of the Advocates Network for Jamaica. So before the break, we looked at education, we looked at employment, and one of the things that stuck out to me, so yes, unemployment is the lowest that it has been in forever. As far as Jamaica is concerned. But one of the things that I also heard from one of the political pundits was that Jamaica is comprised primarily of low-skilled, low-tech, and low-wage people. My question is, what are the implications of that in light of all that we have been seeing?
The low capacity to compete and grow our economy. Our growth rate have been looking good because we're coming out of a recession, the COVID impact. In fact, the last World Bank report points to the fact that we're just about at the pre-COVID level, right, of growth. Now,
so would this be real growth, or is just because, so it's just comparatively speaking?
Well, we're coming out. I mean, we had a big decline in GDP, so we're now seeing that we're coming back up. But if we look at the GDP per capita, which is the best kind of estimate we have of how well we're doing on average. Obviously, with the gap, it's not a good story because some of us are doing so much better and some of us are doing very badly. But if we look at that average, what the data tells us is that the GDP in 2019 was higher than the GDP per capita. The GDP per capita in 2019 was higher than the GDP per capita in 2022. So the average is not looking good. Okay. So it's instructive that we have this unprecedented unemployment rate, yet the recent Don Anderson poll pointed to the fact that Jamaicans were not only very concerned about the issues going into the elections, right? That was the question. But when he disaggregated the issues, the number one the issue that most Jamaicans were concerned about was access to jobs and job opportunity. 15%, that was the highest category of. Now, that tells you something. In fact, if you look at all the questions, whether it is jobs, whether it is access to education, all the issues that were listed, most of them, infrastructure, roads, and so on, those were all listed. Most of them, about 50% of them, we could think about in terms of the standard of living of the average Jamaican. So if that is true, that the average standard of living is declining or certainly not growing comparable to the growth rates that we hear about, then we have a problem. And if we have a labor force that is incapable because of their training and or lack thereof and the skill level, unable to take us to another level. They are not able to innovate and create and build the kinds of technology and new ways of doing things that's required to compete in a very highly competitive world. If that's not happening, then we don't have growth prospects that will lift us out of the problems that we have.
So to summarize what you're saying then, because I'm linking this back to the idea of poor education. So the instances where we have low tech, low wage, and high employment is literally just an indictment on the fact that we don't have the right ducks in the row to do what is required, because at the end of the day, we can't grow properly because we're not educated properly. That's
Yes.
what you're saying.
And importantly, growth meaning that we all grow and become better off. Remember, you know, the reason most Jamaicans leave Jamaica and go abroad is for a better standard of living. They want to go a place where they feel safer. They want to go a place where they can get properly educated. They want to go to a society in which they can earn more income, etc. So if we know that that's the challenge that we have, then we have to ask ourselves and look carefully at our economic model to make a determination whether the things we're doing is going to grow the GDP per capita. The Minister of Finance told us, you know, I think it was two budget speeches ago, he made the point, in fact, showed us a graph and pointed out that the average standard of living today, you know, a few years ago, is comparable to what it was in the 70s. The real GDP per capita.
I think that lines up with something that also, so I'm looking over one of the documents that you published, I think it was November, and you said something, and I hope that I am staying true to what you had stated, that the sectors that with the capacity to produce properly, they only contributed 49% to GDP as opposed to 65% right around the world. So we are roughly 16% below what we are supposed to be doing to be okay.
Absolutely. And therein lies the challenge that we live in a globally competitive world. Remember, you know, if we think about ourselves in isolation, we get one measure. But when we live in a world which is so open, you know, we compare ourselves and the standards are comparable to others in the world. I mean, we're talking about a GDP per capita of only about $5,000, right? The world average is close to $15,000 per year. And the highest countries in the world we're talking about over $100,000 per capita, right? Now, in that context, we can see that we have a far way to go. And we have to rethink the approach that we're taking to growth and development. And it's in that context I tie in the paper that you've seen the changes that we're talking about in constitutional reform to the economic prospects of our country for one fundamental reason. The Constitution speaks to how we make laws and policy, right? Mm-hmm. When we have our legislature, who we ask to make laws and policy, shape policy, that's the role of the cabinet, then we have to ask the question, how are those laws and policies being made? Who drives them? Whose interests are they being made? In whose interests? Those are important questions. And we see sometimes laws being passed and we have to ask, well, who will benefit? We see laws being changed very quickly, right? We saw recently a constitutional change being made very quickly in the context of a constitutional reform committee and a ministry set up for constitutional reform that is taking a longer time to interrogate the issues in order to make changes. Now, I'm saying all of that to say that we have to ask the question, when we're making these laws and policy, in whose interests are we trying to serve? And many Jamaicans are saying these laws and these policies are not in our interest. Now, if we create a different framework where you and I and others all have a fair shot at influencing these policies, and we can do that through the right to petition our parliament, to share with our parliament perspectives we have in how to fix the problems in our communities and in the country at large. When we create a constitutional arrangement that does that, we can impact economic policy.
So I'm going right back now to that document that you had written. So you're pretty much saying that based on all that we have spoken, if the Constitution is done properly, there will be legal...
Properly meaning more inclusive. There are mechanisms for us to have a voice.
All the stakeholders, all the necessary stakeholders. You're saying that it will speak to our growth legally, economically, socially, and it can address all those maladies that we are facing.
Because we are now empowered to influence the decisions. It's not just a few. If you think about it just commonsensically, we have a few people in Parliament that are making decisions. And they're influenced by a few people in the society who has their ears. We're likely to get different decisions if we open up opportunities where these decisions are not just made by technicians coming from the ministries who give technical advice to the ministers and so on and shape decision, but we get the experiential knowledge of people in terms of how these decisions have impacted them.
So we just
and how
need
we
better
can change
leaders.
them. Sorry?
We could just say that we need better leaders then.
No, well, I think we need a more inclusive process because if we keep saying we want better leaders, we're asking for people individuals to make better decisions for us. And I'm saying that hasn't worked. We've tried it for 61 years. It hasn't quite worked. Because sometimes we don't get better leaders.
So I'm trying to disaggregate the two. So it's not an issue of poor or no leadership. It's more an issue of a poor leadership framework. That's the issue that we're having.
A leadership framework that enables and facilitates our voices. That's what a democracy is about. A democracy is about a framework in which the people influence the decisions that affect them directly. We ought to have a say in how our taxpayers' dollars are. Can you influence how you pay taxes, right?
Yes.
Can you influence how it's spent? What's the mechanism to do that? There's none. So ought we to have a mechanism where, for example, in our communities, we can say, let's get a share of that community parish budget, say, and let's make a decision as all of us. We know the crime perpetrators in our communities. They are friends and our family and cousins, people we know, right? We know that this man down the road, right, has been involved in criminality. We have knowledge of that. I have been in these conversations with people in communities, and I can tell you, they understand the source of the problem. And some of them will tell you it starts with the children not being able to go to school, physically go to school, because of the levels of crime. So they're coming out of school incapable of passing the exams, not because they're dunce, because they can't physically go to school. So let's create a safe path for our kids to go to school to get better outcomes. That's one solution. And that can only come from the specifics of a community, people who know the reality and understand. We went to another community, they talk about interpersonal problems. And they're saying a lot of domestic abuse has to do with the fact that we don't have the skills to solve these interpersonal problems.
So problem-solving skills.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more that we need to address. So we'll go to our final break, and then when you come back, we'll look at those and see how we can pull everything together so that it can be meaningful. So you are watching The Conversation. I am Kwame Thomas, and I am sitting here with Professor Rosalea Hamilton, advocate of the Advocates Jamaica Network. So welcome back to The Conversation. Just before the break and into the break, we started talking, and I am looking at the fact that so crime is going down. We're still anxious. Employment is going up, I'm not sure where we are in terms of education, but the Pattis report is showing a great gap in between. And then socially, we are not where we should be. Our GDP is nowhere remotely close to where it should or it could be. And the question that I want to throw now is whether or not we are framing, I think that's what we started out by looking at. Are we framing the problem correctly? Is it that we are solving a problem that doesn't exist and we're ignoring the ones that are directly in our face? Because if we're growing in all these areas, but yet still these things persist, it means that we're an anomaly. So how do we fix that paradox?
You know, I try to look at the big picture, you know, using a historical lens. And, you know, I've come to the realization that we have perpetuated too many of the institutions that were set up for a different time and for a different objective. Prior to our independence, we had a society that was run and controlled by a few, and the decisions, the laws, the rules, the policies were to perpetuate a status quo in which a few continue to get rich and to be better off, and the majority simply serves the interests of that few. When I look closely at many of the institutions today, the frame is still there. We're struggling to do it differently within the same. It's like we have a house and we've not reconfigured the house. We have to build out new parts. We have to redesign, because the house was never designed for all of us to have a fair shot. It was designed for a few, and the majority simply support that few.
So on one hand, I'm hearing that the system is no longer suitable. It's no longer suitable for us. It's no longer fit for purpose.
For the modern world, absolutely.
And on the other hand, I'm also hearing that we are not as mature as we ought to have been as a democracy. Is it that it's a little bit of both, or is it one or the other?
Well, yeah, a bit of both. Part of the lack of maturity is the lack of preparedness. Remember, we have to come back to who we are in terms of our educational levels, what we understand, what we don't have, what skill sets we have and what we don't have. So, and some of it is just mindset. I mean, you know, we're still talking about emancipating ourselves from mental slavery, you know. These are still relevant concepts because we have that history, we can't ignore it. So as we evolve, as we continue this journey to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery and from the institutional legacies that we've inherited, as we continue along that path, I think we have to look with fresh eyes, with fresh lens, as what are the kinds of changes we need to do to deal with the past and to prepare ourselves for the future. That's where we are. And that's why I'm excited about the conversation we are having, or we ought to have, in the constitutional reform process, because we have this unique opportunity to reset that legal framework that can give us better governance, better social and better economic outcomes.
All right, so we're moving forward now. We have looked at all those things, and my question is, if you were to pick, give me the top 3 things. What are those things that we need? And we can start with the low-hanging fruits. What are those things that we need to get right now in 2024, going into 2025? What are those things?
Well, I will start with the constitutional framework. It's not going to happen all in 1 year and one time, and you know, it's much too complex. There's discussion about phasing the issues, no problem. We have to get rid of the king, yes, we have to. But getting rid of the king is not enough. Changing the court and having CCJ as our final court is not enough. If we're talking about improving governance, we must look again at this inherited framework within which we make decisions. We have to look again at the power in the hands of the executive and our prime minister. We have to look at the extent to which the executive controls our representatives in parliament. Our parliamentarians are sometimes in the very same positions we are when it comes to getting things done. If we engage our MPs and so on, and we're trying to get roads and so on, if you're not in power, you know, you're facing the same kinds of issues. The executive controls and dominates the decision-making process. if we're going to shift away to get better outcomes, to get better decisions, to get more voices that can make more relevant decisions that touch and concern our lives, then we have to change the structure of Parliament. And importantly, we have to create these mechanisms in which our voices can be heard. So for me, the comprehensive constitutional reform is at the top of the priority because it's tied to, importantly, the bread and butter issues that our people face. So the need to lift the standard of living, and we can see how the rules, different way we make decisions can do that. We need the voices of the economic actors, the young, bright, innovative minds. They need to be around the table, helping to shape the decisions so we get better outcomes.
All right, so that's one.
Yeah, right. Secondly, of course, we're coming into these elections. Very important now because we have to all make important decisions. Jamaicans need to recognize that it is not acceptable, it's not good enough for 20 and 30% of our people to go out and vote.
It's 37.5, we're
well,
told.
you know, and you know, the fear that it could be less is real.
Yes.
Remember we're talking local government elections. Some people think, chups them teeth and say, that now make no difference. You know, so here is again the opportunity we have, and we have to think about it. We know the things we don't like in the local government arrangement. The fact that we don't have fixed elections, it's 7 years since our last local government election. We can change that in the Constitution. We can put fixed terms in there so that it's predictable when we have local and national elections.
Okay.
So we have an opportunity to do that. We have an opportunity to strengthen our voices at the local government level so that we can make decisions like decisions about the budget. Yes. Right? We can put those arrangements in place. So we need to get active. Don't see the upcoming election as a passive one. Let's engage the discussion with our councillors and the, you know, all these people and so on who are part of the whole local government infrastructure, and let us make some better decisions about our local government. And of course, the third issue is the national elections.
So, well, as it relates to the national elections, I want to ask, do you think that the People's National Party, have they, or the opposition, as the case may be, have they signaled to Jamaica that they are a government in waiting? Have they done the requisite things to say that we are a government in waiting and we are a worthy choice?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, we've just seen a reshuffling of the shadow cabinet, and I think we're all waiting to see what they represent, because we've seen the change of faces and people.
But do you think that was a wise decision now, so close to local government?
Well, you know, whether it's wise or not, I want to come to the point I raised earlier, that the voters have already signaled that what will get them to vote is the issues. And so both the government, the ruling party, and the opposition needs to put these issues to the people. So I think the opposition still has time to put to the people of Jamaica the issues that will get them to go out and vote for an opposition party to the extent that those issues align with their own views. So does the government. The government has an opportunity to say, here are the issues. We heard you. You've heard, you know, people like the Advocates Network have been out there talking, shouting about the issues that we're not happy with. And to the extent that others share these views, they've heard it. So what adjustments will be made? We're all watching, we're all listening for that. And that, these issues will make the difference. And as I said earlier, the number one issue that the voters said they were concerned about is these job opportunities. And I want to suggest this is not just about a job. It's about the quality of the job. It's about the working conditions. It's about pay. It's about how we feel when we get up in the morning and we go to a job where we spend most of our day. Are we getting real satisfaction from that experience? And if we're not, then it's an issue. We want more opportunities to get better, you know, get a better job. And as I said, when I looked closely at the responses, all of the responses suggest that what needs to be articulated in the political arena is the extent to which the policies will improve the standards, the living standards of the Jamaican people. And it is when Jamaicans see that here's a set of issues that will give us a fair shot at improving our living standards that I think people will actively go out and vote.
So you're saying, on one hand, yes, the issues are there, the issues are complex. However, the polls and what we have experienced, we have all the necessary tools to pull ourselves out of the apathy that currently confronts us as voters. And the persons who have access to power, who have been elected to lead us, they have all the answers there based on what we have said to them to pull us to make the right choice.
It's not so simple as
I'm trying to simplify it.
But what I would say is this, that the solutions are in our hands. You know, I like to use the phrase, the power of the people is greater than the people in power. Right? Yes. That we, the people of Jamaica, can solve our problems. I have no... Let me remind Jamaicans, you know, that we are the best in the world when it comes to track and field. We're the best in the world when it comes to music. We're the best in the world in many areas. We shine. We're as good as anybody else in the world. So we don't lack the capacity to run this country properly. And so I don't start with any notion that there's any deficit in who we are as a people. I think it exists, and if it's not here, it exists overseas, because half of Jamaica, more than half of Jamaica is living overseas.
So
right?
That sounds to me that you need us to invite the diaspora to have a more prominent voice at the table as well.
Absolutely. Many of them are Jamaicans. Many of them are citizens of this country and should be treated as such. Mm-hmm. So, you know, when I talk about Jamaicans, I'm talking about Jamaicans at home and abroad. Especially when we think about the modern world where, you know, many of us live here and we work overseas online. So where we physically reside in is just a comfortable space. But who are we as a people? We are Jamaicans. We know exactly what that is.
So I think in closing, what we can actually do, there's a statement that was made by our Governor General. There's nothing that's wrong with Jamaica that cannot be fixed by what's right with Jamaica. Is that a sentiment that you share? I
absolutely think so. I think that there's a lot right with Jamaica and Jamaicans, and we need to build on that. We need to don't take some of the freedoms, for example, we have for granted. One of the things I say as often as I can is that Jamaica sits on top of the world with respect to freedom of speech and freedom of the press. So that as critical as I and others have been about the governance arrangement that we see in our country and the human rights arrangement and so on, we're not killed. In many countries, if we said half of what we said, we would be killed. And therefore, I think we need to put that in perspective, that these are freedoms that we ought not to take for granted, because they can dissipate. We just have to look at what's happening in America, and we see that assumptions that have been made for decades about American democracy is now being questioned.
Oh, all right. Thank you very much, very much. We have had a very robust discussion, and as per normal, you know that we're going to call you back again at some point in time, because there are always issues that we can always discuss, and there's a wealth of information coming from your end. So thank you for having stayed with us. This is the conversation where we just looked at a number of issues that have been facing us and how we can actually transition, because we started out by looking at reflection and resolutions for the new year. So I want you to continue to watch and continue to chime in with these discussions. I am Kwame Thomas, and I just had a discussion with Professor Rosalea Hamilton, co-chair of the Advocates Network Jamaica. This has been the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.